Finally, welcome to the finale of the Precision AR15 build series. If you're just finding this video on its own, I highly encourage you to go watch the other 12 videos in this series to understand how we got here and all the customizations and the work that we did. If you did come through the entire series and you're now here at the end with me, I really appreciate you following along. It means more to me than you probably realize. All right. Because at the time of this filming, I've already put her through her paces. She's gotten banged up and dirty. Let's look at some glamour shots first before that happened. And we will talk about the aesthetics first, then we'll talk about functionality, and then finally we'll go through zeroing her, what the shot patterns and the groups looked like, and then finally shooting her at 300 yards, which, although that's not super long range, it's what I had access to for now. All right, first and foremost, let's talk about what I really liked. I really liked how the hexagon and geometric patterns came out, how it matched up nicely, what we did on the lower with what we did with the bipod leg, the octagonal nature of the carbon fiber handguard, the hex mag. I think thematically that all worked. What I don't think worked thematically was the color scheme. I think we probably could have done a little better with having the lower and upper being a matching color. Pick a winner. I think just having the handguard and upper and lower all be different, it was just too much variation. And then let's get to probably the biggest aesthetic mistake that I think I made, and that's the inclusion of the FDE parts. So we've got the bipod in FDE, and we've got the stock in FDE. I did that because I had this stock lying around. I thought I'd be happy with all the different color mismatch. The minute I put it on the build, I knew I wasn't happy. However, being stubborn like I am, instead of getting a new stock, I doubled down and I sprayed the bipod in FDE as well. So now I'm deeper down the hole than before. I should have gone with gray or black or something that fit the color scheme a little bit better. The FDE really stands out, and I thought the more that I added, the more that it would make it work. The opposite happened. It just made it worse. So probably wouldn't do the same color scheme again. Maybe I'll refinish things in the future. Who knows? But for now, it's staying as is. All right. I also really like this handguard. One of the things is it's quite stiff. It holds up very well. And I mentioned in the handguard making video that I got the matte carbon fiber version, not the gloss. And I think that was a fantastic choice, because the way that these things are made is they're often wrapped as the epoxy is curing, and you can actually feel, it's a consistent pattern. You can actually feel it. It's got tooth to it. So microscopic, not microscopic, maybe like a millimeter in difference. There's actually a tiny, tiny ridge in the epoxy. You can't see it unless you get really close up. Maybe let's try. But the reason I love that is it provides a lot of tooth. Like, your hand really grips it very well. And it's gone. Oh, there we go. So you can actually see here that I've got some color, some red color that came off of a barrier that I was firing off of, because this grip of the handguard was actually aggressive enough to pull off some paint on that barrier. So that gives you an idea of just how toothy it is. Really, really functional. Not something that I was expecting, but an absolute boon as far as I am concerned. Next up, let's talk about the bipod. And sadly, this is going to be where the biggest disappointment of the entire project comes in. And it's really disappointing because it was the absolute hardest part of this project as well. It took forever. It was very hard. The learning curve was extremely steep, and the design failed in the end anyways. The idea was always that you could push the bipod and lock it into various areas at 45-degree increments. You'll notice that this one in the center doesn't lock so good. That is because there just was not enough space between the elements of the bracket. So this one has survived on the other side. So this one locks nicely. It's got a little bit of pressure that you can load when you're about to shoot, but that's actually what led to the failure. I've always liked loading my bipod to get a nice sturdy platform to shoot from, and that's what bit me here. Let's see if we can take it apart and look at some of the details that I'm talking about. All right, so as you'll remember, here's the nub that positively indexes into the bracket, and you can see that that nub, due to me leaning into the bipod and loading it to get a nice stable platform, it has sheared off these two corners in the positive indexing position of the bracket. Now, that's not a complete failure. This can easily be redesigned now that we know where the failure point is. I see two ways to redesign it. One of them is if you're not using the 45-degree angle points, exclude them. And then you've got a ton of material between these flat sections and the 90-degree, which is what I use. And that's probably what I'll end up doing. I'll probably remill this bracket and just exclude the 45-degree angles. I don't use them, whatever, get rid of them. If you do use the 45-degree angle slots and you like that functionality, how I would end up redesigning this is actually increasing the size of the bracket and pushing this knob further down the leg. And the reason for that is the farther away we get the knob from the pivot point, the more beef of material we will have between each notch, because it'll sit out like here. The notches will be further out, and so you'll have larger amounts of material. That is going to require both redesigning the leg to push this out, the notch, and the bracket. If you watch the videos, you know that this leg was super hard to mill, and I'm not redoing the leg. So if I fix this, it's going to be with the bracket, but you have two options. The other slight design failure of the leg is in a little bit design, a little bit in material. As you'll see in a little bit, I shoot in a very rocky environment, and although Cerakote is a very strong material, it is still no match for jagged rocks and very gravelly dirt. My Cerakote has started to wear on the tip where it goes into the ground. It was designed to have a tip to have some nice grip. So that functionally, fantastic. Aesthetically, we're paying the price for Cerakoting it instead of, say, anodizing it. That's not me guaranteeing that anodizing would have been any better. This is a very aggressive area for bipods, as you'll see in the videos in a little bit where you see me shooting. Here you can see the other one. So it's not end of world. It hasn't completely removed it from the tip, but it is wearing faster than I thought it would. And so what I probably would do is I actually would probably still Cerakote this, but I would design the tip to not be aluminum. I would design the tip to accept like a 3D printed plastic piece that goes over it so that it's kind of replaceable and just because I'm a nerd and I appreciate the aesthetics and I want to keep things nice usually, but if keeping things nice doesn't bother you, this isn't a problem at all. Don't even worry about putting a plastic piece or whatever in your design. I'm not hugely in love with how the upper and lower mated. We were at a little bit of a disadvantage. We did have to use a forged lower to create our look, and it's very hard to modify this section on a forged lower, so it just doesn't match up perfectly with the CMMG upper that we went with. You got to get pretty close to see that it doesn't, so it's not end of world, but just something to keep in mind. I still probably like this combination more than having gone with just a standard mil-spec style upper. I'll pay the price back here to get the almost matching thematic lightning cuts, but just something to keep in mind. And the last thing that we are going to talk about is one more design flaw that I made. So in the assembly video, we did talk about how there's a small gap between the upper and our handguard. That's due to the fact that there are shims in front of the barrel nut so that it can be correctly timed to accept the gas tube and all that. I wish I had taken that into account, or I had maybe made the holes that the screws go in oblong so that you can actually adjust the length and the fit and then tighten the screws. One of those things is probably how I would do them in the future. And the reason for that is I measured it exactly to be able to access the adjustment on my adjustable gas block. Well, when that stuck out a little bit further, that modified the distance it stuck out, and I actually could not access the adjustment screw on the gas block. So I just took a Dremel real quick, buzzed that out so I could make it functional and do the adjustments quickly. I have enough space, I have plenty of space to slightly re-sand the front nose profile of the handguard, so I can make it aesthetically pleasing in the future. But that is just a slight failure in design that I did not foresee. Other than that, the handguard's great, and I probably will come back and re-sand that in the future, but I'm definitely going to reuse these in the future. Oh, and actually, while we're talking about the adjustable gas block, let me tell you how I ended up setting it up, because this is my first time using one. What I found was if I have the suppressor on the weapon and I set the gas block up to work with the suppressor just to the point that it cycles correctly, but I've minimized all other recoil impulse, if I take that suppressor off, it does not cycle correctly. I know that that is something that is fairly common. You're going to either optimize the gas system for suppressed or not suppressed. I'll be honest, I went and optimized it for unsuppressed, even though 99% of the time I'm going to shoot suppressed. And the reason being is, even though this is a fun rifle that's not for home defense or safety, it's just for fun and practice, I could not get over the fact that my rifle wouldn't cycle if I, for some odd reason, didn't have the suppressor on. I know that that's a little overboard, given that its purpose is long range shooting suppressed, and maybe I'll change my mind in the future. But as of right now, I just couldn't rectify that decision in my mind. So it's just something to consider if you're using an adjustable gas block and you expect to shoot it suppressed. One more thing that I forgot to mention when I was recording that previous section was I skimped on the cost of the safety selector, and I'm paying for it. There's this weird behavior it has where you'll move it into the fire position and you'll go to fire and it actually won't let the trigger group work. You have to push it this tiny little bit more and then it will allow you to fire. So I'll probably be swapping that out. All right, let's go see this thing in action. Off camera, I did decide to do something that I usually don't do for an AR. I actually followed the barrel break-in procedure this time. I still have reservations on whether it's worth it, but this is supposed to be a precision rifle, so why not? I did this while tuning the gas block, so each shot had multiple purposes anyways. Here we see using a chronograph to find the velocity of an M193 round through this rifle. This is also a good time to mention that all shots you see from here forward are using M193 ball ammo. You might ask why I'm doing that with an AR that's supposed to be for precision work. Well, because I wanted a baseline of what this rifle is capable of without fancy match ammo or custom loads first. Those 5 shots averaged 3,271 feet per second. This information will help us get some preliminary dope using Shooter's Calculator. And with that, the range that we zeroed at, our bullet weight, so this is M193, it's 55 grains. But we also need a couple other pieces of information. So firstly, we need the ballistic coefficient. And while I couldn't find a standard ballistic coefficient for M193, if we look hard enough around the interwebs, we'll find that it's generally in the 2.6-ish range. As this guy said, if it ain't 0.26 something, then it isn't M193. So we'll use his recommendation of 0.267. The other thing we need is our sight height. And what it's actually asking for is the sight height over bore. So although I can look up on Aero Precision's website what my sight height is, that's going to be over the Picatinny rail. So we need to add the distance from the Picatinny rail to our bore center for an AR15, which is, best I can find, about 1.215 inches. So if we add my 1.5 inch sight height to that, you can see what the calculation comes to. We can then create our graph, and it's going to give us, by default, increments of every 25 yards for what our elevation windage calculations are going to be in both mil and MOA. We'll next be shooting right around the 300-yard range, and so we're looking at about 3/4 of a mil in drop. The other fun thing that it shows is where you hit the sound barrier, and the reason that's interesting is you lose a lot of accuracy when a bullet travels through the transonic range going from supersonic to subsonic, and so right out to about 775 we'll have good accuracy, but 800 yards plus we're going to lose a decent amount. Here we can see the 100-yard groups and how they improved as I got settled in and messed with scope settings. I finally got to where I declared the rifle zeroed. Ignore that flyer to the left, it was called. If we ignore it, we're looking at a 0.741 MOA group. If we include the flyer, it becomes 1.291 MOA. So let's keep that excluded. With that information in hand, the range we will really be testing this weapon out on is a wooded 300-yard range that shoots from one ridge across the valley into the side of another ridge. The goal of the day was to get footage of 3 consecutive hits on a 6-inch gong, which sits at about 285 yards out. I had done it a few days earlier without issue, so I was confident we'd be able to get that footage. The universe had other plans. So I apologize that the footage is not as glamorous as we had intended, but we'll have to make do with what we were able to get under the circumstances.
Yep, hit. Hit.
In the end, it may have an issue or two, but like I mentioned, I know how to address them. I will come back around and fix the bipod so it's fully functional again and address a few aesthetic issues. But when it comes to shooting, it fits the bill perfectly for the intended purpose. I mean, really tight groups, this gun absolutely outshoots my abilities. And so as far as I'm concerned, that's a win. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.